I'm Chaplain Jacob Scott of the Oregon National Guard. This is the Hope in the Trenches podcast. We're going forward. I'll sit down for conversations with people who offer interesting and informative perspectives on finding strength for life and work in the trenches, and even improving our spiritual posture. Whether you feel like you're under heavy bombardment or ready to go over the top toward a new objective, it's good to be with you. The motivation for this podcast comes in part from the Army's new holistic health and fitness concepts. Just last October, we published a new FM 7-22, Field Manual 7-22, with that title, Holistic Health and Fitness. One of the 5 pillars for that new publication is spiritual readiness, an essential component of holistic health and fitness. Now, anything spiritual becomes very individualized really quickly. And while commanders and other leaders can create space and opportunities for the people in our formations to practice any number of spiritual disciplines, ultimately, it's on each of us to build those practices. Of course, chaplains can help you on your way, but it's an individual endeavor. So my goal for the podcast is to increase our knowledge and awareness of ideas or concepts that might help us grow in that domain. So about the name, Hope in the Trenches. If you've been in the military for a while, you've probably heard the old adage that hope is not a course of action, or hope is not a strategy. Well, I'm going to argue that hope should be more highly regarded as an essential characteristic of what we do in the military, and that it's absolutely essential to leadership. And I'll also argue that hope is not just the chaplain's lane. So what is hope? Where does a person or leader find hope and share it with others? I think that's a question that's foundational for any spiritual fitness assessment or even just casual reflection or conversation about the meaning of life. Now, hope is not a distinctively religious or spiritual idea, even though it does have some particular nuances in religious or spiritual concepts. One definition I found for the word hope is that hope is a positive motivational state, not just a feeling, that's based on an interactively derived or maybe socially derived, or I think that's just a fancy way of saying that you find hope in community. Hope is a positive motivational state that's based on an interactively derived sense of successful A, agency, and B, pathways. A, agency or goal-directed energy, or I would throw ownership in there too, and B, pathways or planning to meet your goals. That is to say, how are you going to get there? Hope is also talked about as a character strength. There's one website for the VIA or the VIA character assessment that describes hope as a transcendent virtue, distinguishing transcendent hope or something that's other or above from just a temporal or maybe more here and now present tense type of hope. When we talk about transcendent hope, we're talking about having an object outside of ourselves in an ultimate purpose. That's an essential characteristic of what you would find in religious contexts when you talk about hope. That's the chaplain's bread and butter. Another definition of hope is expecting the best in the future and working to achieve it. Believing that a good future is something achievable. You'll notice that there's a future-mindedness or a future thrust to those definitions of hope. Now, in positive psychology, which was the basis for the Army's Resiliency program over the last 10 or 15 years, hope is distinguished from simple optimism. And I want to draw that line too. Hope is not the same as simple optimism. And in positive psychology, they distinguish the two by emphasizing agency or control and the pathway toward a future outcome. You heard me use that word pathway earlier. Now, optimism or simple optimistic thought sometimes just looks like wishing away negative stuff. So I'm not advocating a naive optimism or a false hope that would fail to take into account your circumstances, because we all know you can't just wish away failures to plan or prepare or resource properly, and you can't just wish away the consequences of your behaviors. That's a naive optimism. Hopeful thoughts and beliefs, this strength of character, are necessary in the midst of and in spite of difficult or dangerous circumstances. Hope is absolutely necessary, and that strength of character is essential to improve and thrive in ambiguity and chaos of the future. The positive psychologist Rick Snyder, he was a psychologist at Kansas University. He's one of the guys who advanced hope theory within that field of positive psychology. And he said, in thinking about hope, I would paint the following motto on the metaphorical barn of the positive psychology grounds. Quote, all strengths are equal, but some strengths are more equal than others. Unquote. All strengths are equal, but some strengths are more equal than others. And that's the bin that I would throw hope into. We talk a lot about character strengths and attributes in the military, and they're all equal, but I think hope is a little bit more equal than all the others. We find in the military, too, that leadership matters. And you heard me say at the beginning that hope is an absolutely essential component of leadership in the military. I read a paper a couple years ago that stated there's a relationship between the positive traits of a leader, things like hope, optimism, resiliency, and the performance of the organization that he or she leads. There's a relationship between positive leader traits, things like hope and resiliency, and the performance of the organization. That seems to be a no-brainer in military contexts. Another article suggested that leaders affect the identification of their followers and influence their self-regulatory processes. That is, leaders affect how people identify themselves and how they interpret and respond to what's going on around them. And they also connect each and every person in the organization to the organization's mission, or at least that's what they should be trying to do. So it's not just about the individual traits of the leader, but whether or not they can communicate that to their people. When I was in ROTC, my goodness, that was more than 25 years ago now, I remember being taught squad and platoon tactics and how to write operations orders. And one of the paragraphs in the op order, after the mission statement, they taught us that the next most important paragraph in the op order is the commander's intent. After the mission statement, the next most important paragraph is the commander's intent. And I learned 3 components to a commander's intent. First is the purpose. Why are we doing this mission? Second are the key tasks. So what are the steps that we need to accomplish to get there? What do we need to do successfully in order to accomplish our mission? And third is the desired end state. So how do we know that we've accomplished our mission? What do we want conditions to look like when we're done? And it was always said that if a soldier knows their mission and the commander's intent, they can accomplish anything. I think that's true in life, too. If you know your purpose and where you're trying to go, and you can break down what you need to get there, you'll go far. That's true for you as an individual. That's true for organizations and units as well. So if you're a leader, you want to craft and communicate a vision that can create some energy and commitment and belonging and inspire people to achieve and give them hope. You want to paint a picture of a better or brighter future, even if it looks fuzzy at times, and put that into words so that people can understand. Of course, that adjective better is always a transient state. We always have to constantly assess and modify our strategy and our behaviors based on what's happening around us. But we have to pay attention to our strategy or our approach and our behavior with a fervent hope that that better future is possible. So with the Hope in the Trenches podcast, we'll talk to people that can help us do that along the way, to live out each of our callings, whether you're a soldier or an airman at the lowest rungs of the organizational ladder, or you're a leader, to live out our callings with passion and creativity and hope. This has been an introduction to the Hope in the Trenches podcast. This podcast is produced by the Oregon National Guard Public Affairs Office. I'm Chaplain Scott, and my prayer for you is that wherever you find yourself, that you may find hope for today and strength for the ambiguity and chaos of life. Blessings on your day.